Hello and welcome back to another episode of Gifting Git-Oxide. Today we're looking at this PR here, which tackles a big task that is revision parsing. And this is a complicated PR because, not every gift is made equal. And some gifts, they just are bound to take a lot of time compared to what it would be if you would not accept the gift. So this PR is already kind of under in a difficult spot because revision parsing or revspec parsing, that's the thing you get when you do git rev parse head one. It's a specification micro language, if you so will, to be able to navigate the commit graph. And it's very powerful at that. And every input that Git takes, it's basically run through this parser. So even if you pass it a hash like this will go through that parser and will be recognized as object. And this will also be recognized as object. It's just a short hash, as you can see. So it can do all kinds of neat things. You can, of course, also combine this and do that multiple times, and tons of tricks it has under its sleeve. And you already see that it's kind of a consuming thing. So it goes step by step, and then it's more like an instruction language. So each thing is an instruction, and you can to some extent combine that. There's certainly some starting position here, and then from there you continue to traverse the graph using these little shortcuts here. And as it's super important, it's important to not be worse than Git. When it comes to correctness, for sure. Performance is less important, I think. So initially I mentioned zero copy. It should probably be if Git does it. But, I didn't really check Git I didn't study that intensely yet. So don't know what Git does there, but also performance, to my mind, doesn't really matter here that much, because there's not so many revspecs that are actually passed in. This is something the user does, or potentially even a programmer does, to specify commits more intuitively, even in code. But then again, it really is nothing that usually is very hot. So yeah, performance secondary. Error reporting, probably not super secondary, because this is seen by users. I haven't really seen it fail that much. But if it does fail, it can fail, obviously. Like if you type nonsense like this. And this is something to replicate at the very least. Not word by word, of course, but the different error cases should be handled so that, invalid things do not parse, which should be fairly straightforward. And lastly, there's a bunch of places where Git probably has already some decent tests that we should not forget about and probably replicate to get into the details that are not usually so obvious when studying the documentation. But all in all, it's a big thing. And we are just talking about the revision parsing mechanism, which should also be usable for validation. So there's different layers to this. One layer certainly, and the one to start with, is in Git revision. I already checked out the branch as it is so far, or the PR as it is so far, and it should focus on Git revision and nothing else, because the integration with Git repository later on is something that can be done once you know how this is going to look like. So you don't want to do too much at the same time. Also, all the testing to validate that the parsing works happens here. It happens in Git revision, because here you're on the smallest unit level and you can just set up your tests to make it testable to the extent needed, which means that probably you don't need to look up actual objects there. It doesn't matter. It's more about how you drive what is called database here, which I call delegate. So I didn't do any refactoring yet. already aligned with the author that I will do reviews by just making adjustments and pushing these into the branch, because that's just simply easiest for me. And instead of describing what you want, just do it and set a new foundation. So there was a discussion. I mean, there was supposed to be more discussion, but I think there was some misunderstanding that led the author to just jump the gun and set, basically migrate the code that was there already in one of their projects. And where is it here? So I don't feel this is properly aligned yet what this should be. So again, this PR isn't really, it's not really the right time for me for this, but yeah, let's try nonetheless. It seemed like it's possible to get this to work, but I also think it will be a lot of corrective measures will be needed to push this into the shape that I think it should fit in. And this is what we do now in this PR. So first of all, I mentioned it here somewhere. Git repository should not be altered at all. However, right now this is the case. Let's see if I can bring up the changes here. So Git repository does have a bunch of changes, and it appears, I mean, look at this. This is all the changes here in one, and it appears that the parser does not have dedicated integration tests, so API top level. What happens if you run the parse function or whatever it is? And this means all the tests are one level up in Git repository where they should not be at all. The tests have to be down in Git revision, and you set up tests to make this comfortable for you and simple and easy. And there's a bunch of tests here sorted by some criteria. It appears, what does it appear like? Expected. So this seems to be taking just a commit, and we transform this to a hex version of it. So it's a 40-byte hexa, and we have to convert it into a string apparently. I don't know why that would be needed or should be needed. And then there should be some outcome, so it should just parse as full char, because it basically is a no op for the parser. So there's a lot of ceremony about each individual little thing, which of course makes it kind of cumbersome to work with. And that's something, that is probably related to the high level of this. Like this is Git repository level. And there, this comes last. They just test that the individual methods on this delegate actually work. And you test individual little cases that will run this code, because you tested everything else already on Git revision level. You know that everything is gonna work fine. So this is too early, and is also not the place where you test the parser at all. It is supposed to be in Git revision. So I guess as my first change here, I'm gonna reset this entirely. So let's see if I can make this work. I want to get what's on main. And I'm gonna check out the entirety of Git revision to fit to main. And these new, that's interesting. Is this the right way of doing it? Probably not. Let's reset it. And try to just reset it to the latest base. I think that's more like it. So where is that? What is the base for all of this? So that's the first, this is the base, okay. Let's copy that revision number, the revision number, which is probably because IntelliJ has some framework for it that just has some abstract notion of revision. And then we use that hash to say, give me the original version. So now everything is supposed to be set back to that. Did that work? I'm not quite sure about that, because there are also some new files, right? And I think these are probably still existing because they should show up as deleted otherwise. Oh. How do I do that most smartly? So after a little pause, I just ended up deleting this manually, checking which files effectively have been added, and I deleted the ones already ran the tests to be sure it still compiles, and it does. So yeah, revparse, which story does that belong to? Okay, in a little Git configuration later, it will pull in different config based on the branch I'm on and automatically set this associated issue ID, which happens to be this tracking ticket to help Git log viewer get the features it needs to be able to use Git Oxide. Then let's remove all changes to or reset. And we do this because we want to allow focusing on the parser itself and perform all the testing there. Integration with Git repository. Happens once that is complete. While testing only the necessary pieces of the, well, testing only the delegate, essentially. Okay. So a lot less code to look at now, because the only thing that's left is Git revision. Git revision. So Git revision. This is a crate that could also be called git rev, but I decided to not, to go for a longer name, and maybe git rev was already taken, was it? Anyway, so whatever, it's essentially git rev. So if I'm thinking about where to put stuff, I'm thinking about what a nice name would be. So what we are parsing here is actually revspecs, right? Can I bring up the documentation for revspecs here? That looks like it. Revision selection. It's probably also in git revparse here, but that seems to be a separate chapter in the book. And revparse should have complete documentation about this, probably. Is there some link somewhere? Further reading? Because that's definitely not it. Do I see spec here? Or is my idea of bringing the name spec in completely nonsensical? So show me revparse, because usually this is called revspec, but maybe they changed. Revspec. Oh, interesting. Or is this just in the source code? So there's a little mention of revspec. Revision specifically, specifiers, specification. Wow, what's going on? All right, I found it. So Git-2 seems to have the notion of revspecs, and they called it like this, even though in the user-facing documentation they don't seem to shorten it, which appears like a good idea. Revision specification. But anyway, this means for us it's probably okay to say this is not a revision parser, it's a revision specification parser, so revspec. And it would probably be in there would probably be some type at some point that identifies a spec in some way. I don't know how that's going to look like yet. Maybe it's not going to be there, but probably it's going to be a revision specification parser. Question also, is there going to be another parser that needs to be differentiated? And the answer is yeah, kind of. I mean, there's a bunch of functionality related to revisions, and having this top level parse, they're never called parser in the Git oxide lingo. They're always using, no nouns, use verbs, shorter, and reminds me less of object-oriented programming. So it's kind of a different mindset, I guess. And it's probably something related to revspec parsing. That said, let's just set it up so that we say, okay, there's supposed to be a specification. We call it spec for short. So it would be git revision spec, already kind of long enough compared to git ref spec, which would be nicer. And let's just put this here. And no need to overdo the modularization. I would now just take what's in parse, make a new submodule, call it parse. It's probably going to be public. And dump everything here. Okay. No, this is no. We also have no tests at all, if I remember correctly, because the testing was done on another level. So let's bring this up here. There's some tests, I think. There's some tests in here that test some inner workings of the parser. And I think that's, that's not what I would do, because, you test the details of the machinery, even though it's already just exposing one function. Gets an input, gives you an output of sorts by a selection of callbacks that are made to the delegate. And this is the thing you want to test. And then you don't care how it's set up internally. So these tests, I think they will also be moved away. So where are we? We are in spec parse. And there's now a git revision spec parse error. That makes sense. I don't know if these errors are the ones we will have, but there will be some sort of indication of errors for sure. This is all up to the delegate here, and that will be an interesting question how errors are supposed to be communicated. Should this crate be the one to determine what errors are looking like? Or is this something that is controlled by the implementer of the delegate? we shall see. And also, how does this look like then to the user? So can we make something that creates nice errors by default if they surface to the user? All questions I have in my mind right now. Okay, so this is a module parse, and it only contains the types. So we have a parse delegate, alternative git revspec delegate, but no, not really, because it's only useful for parsing. So that stays here too. And some sort of error stays in here too. Git revspec parse error makes sense. Now this function itself, it's something we can implement here, but pull out and use the same name. So we can say git revspec parse, and it parses the revspec, but there's also a module that has the same name that contains the types used by this parse function. This means here we make that, can we make that private and pull it up? I think no, I think it has to be like this. Is that tested anywhere? Let's see, maybe it doesn't compile anymore. Let's try to run this. Oh yeah, missing docs. Okay. Fair enough. All works so far. It's also not used anywhere because there's no test actually using this one. So let's just name it parse. Why is that? Is that a hiccup? Because that should be no issue. Okay, it's a hiccup. IntelliJ always takes its time to catch up. Interesting. It's like it can't find the closing brace here. What's up with that? Is that real? Confusing. All right. And now, yeah, the pattern, the brace matching does not work anymore in Vim mode. It's at least not in this file. And now we pull that up. Pub use parse. Parse, which isn't visible in the documentation. Let's try the docs. So that's just for the crate structure, right? Nothing else happened here. Oh, not the whole docs, but only for package git revision. Right. That does not work. So you can. So the thing is, I don't want to have two paths leading to the same function. But I also don't want to have parse as a name for sure. So this should live somewhere relevant. What I usually end up doing is just create a pub crate module that contains all the relevant things to the function, and then you can pull them up. This also means that you nicely, separate dependencies that you require here and not elsewhere. So that's going to be a spec parse error. Okay, is that good? That's going to be a trait and another seemingly random allocation here. Wow, so in order to compare for revision, okay. To compare, yeah, anyway, let's not be held up by this. Let's continue. And it needs peekable. Okay, so that spells out the type. That could very well be an impl trait because we are seemingly iterating over b-string chars, which is yielding, it's actually yielding chars. Oh, that's also an interesting choice because bytes should be enough for that. And Git only knows bytes. So also Git oxide only knows bytes. and that's usually fine. The way this is parsed and so on, you can parse Unicode with that, even though you only know bytes, because the special characters you parse on, they're just ASCII, and that's what Git assumes. So anyway, let's just make this work. And now we import parse function parse. Since parse is now public, I'm allowed to pull this up, and otherwise it's hidden, but we'll see that. Let's clean this up real quick. Peekable, not needed anymore. Byte string and byte slice not needed. Cool. Now for the documentation. What was that? This is Git features. Okay, because Git features doesn't have a few toggles enabled, which is fine. These docs don't resolve, but nothing else seems to have a problem. Also, it's not fully documented yet. So now for the structure, we've got git revision spec parse as a function. Okay. And there's parse, the parse error, which is this plus the delegate. And it's a parse delegate because you implement it and then you provide the parser with information that it seems to be needing. And there's two use cases for this. And I don't know if I'm over engineering this by thinking of that. So maybe there's only one use case, which probably is, I was thinking of validation on the one hand, and like actual resolution of objects or object names on the other. And I really, if I can't recall where I got that idea of validation from, this probably means that it's a mistake. But let's quickly check, because I think I mentioned it here. Validation. Oh yeah, something I mentioned somewhere else. Yeah, so I doubt myself here, is validation really something we need, because I can't really imagine how or what we would want there. But anyway, okay, let's make this a commit. That's the structure. This looks like the place where the parsing functionality should live. Refactor, structural changes to allow testing the parsing of specs themselves. So I think, yeah, right. I recall now the idea about validation is if you don't bind it so strongly to object IDs, it's actually easier to test that. Because we only care, if you see this as an instruction language here, then we only care that it says, oh, I want a revision with this name. Could also be main, could be refs heads main. And then I want to apply a bunch of operations on it. I think you can do path. You can select path out of that, and then you get the blob ID, for example, like stuff like this you can do. If you know the syntax, which obviously I don't, but you can do it. I don't ever use this. So. And then all you really have to do is to validate that you make the callbacks in the right order according to the specification. And the state itself can be kept in the delegate, and that's all there is to it. And from that point of view, error handling could be made so that it's entirely, even the error is kept in the delegate. So we don't have to deal with crazy generic setups here. because we will only know, oh, delegate could do it or could not do it. Like here, have the head, or I parse a head. So all these prefixes, of course, is this used somewhere? Yeah, this is used. You know, no need to prefix anything here. It's just what is it that we are doing, and is it separate? So here resolve head and resolve ref, it's absolutely the same thing. There is no difference. So these are actually the same. What's the next step? So now I think it's just fair to prepare this for a test, just to say, here is how I envision these tests to happen, and see how that could look like. First of all, yeah, I should probably study revspecs myself, which I totally didn't. But let's say these, you know, there's nothing related to path, for instance, because there is this syntax to path, to parse path, and look them up in a tree. And I don't think that this is something that would happen here. I don't know what a prefix is. Oh, a prefix. Yeah, right. A prefix is a short name for an object, which is really also an object name. Like there doesn't have, you know, there's find by ID, which seems to be a hexadecimal version of an object that is complete. And there's also one that is incomplete. So there's just a prefix of a full hex. So this is also one, because we can just say, hey, here you got a hexadecimal version of some length, and you can please resolve that or do whatever you want. And these parts here, they're basically the follow-ups. So the ancestor, yeah, you know, so this is state that we wouldn't maintain at all in the parser. This is something that the delegate maintains. And that's essentially how it's easily testable. And then on the level of Git repository later, you can, the only thing you have to do is indicate that there was an error so that the parser can stop. Or not, you know, you can maybe even continue parsing and see collect all the errors that would happen. I don't know, it's up to the implementer, and that's what I want, that is really flexible. And right now this is really very much, it really wants to resolve objects here, but I think it's too early down here in the plumbing crate to actually do that. So let's not. Okay. I agree that there is this ancestor because it's clearly syntax we have. Had that's all ancestors. Okay. And we can, I like that, and ancestor, that reminds me of the respective method that is in the standard iterator. How much time did I spend on this already? Okay, 50 minutes, okay. And then nth parent, same thing. It's this syntax. Where is it? Oh yeah, so tilde, that's the nth parent. I don't know if that should be called like this. I really have to bring up the ref parse docs here. Show me the tilde. How do they call it? Means the first parent of a commit. So they use the same language, so let's stick to the language. Nth parent seems like a good name for that. Okay. Nth parent, nth ancestor. So find by ID, find prefix, that's one, and that's also one. So since I disagree with the way the parsing works, all I can do is break this whole thing now and basically say, okay, let's see if there's anything that can be salvaged before I come in with the, before I cut a lot of what you see here. Oh, that's a repo. Okay, so that's definitely a delegate. I know. You can give it a shorter name elsewhere. Delegate. We can call it delegate D, whatever. No, let's not be like this. Let's call it delegate. Good enough. Right. Next thing. This should, of course, have mutable state, right? Like this one here, it now has to hold state. So that's definitely going to be this. Look how I have to change all these methods, even though they will be removed. Kind of a waste, but just a couple of seconds, but I still see it like this. So it's more like this. And question of ownership, I think getting a mutable borrow to the delegate is the way. I would change the order here because most important is the import, and then you want to process that with the help of the delegate. And the delegate will have its own state. It can abort things early. What's the output? The output is not an object ID. That's something that the delegate will keep, and the user of the delegate will pull it out of the delegate because they know the actual type. For now, I don't know. The goal is to consume all input. So not consuming all input is an error anyway. So all we can say here is either an error or it's nothing worth resolving here. Okay, so if you look at the Git code, there is this notion of, so I haven't really studied how Git is parsing this. But of course you have to start somewhere, right? You like, is this valid here? Can I do this? No, so I always need some sort of starter. I need some sort of prefix, some initial object ID to apply everything to. And look, like it says if it's empty or an at or a head, then just resolve head. So this means empty is automatically head, right? So let's see if Git agrees to that. But Git does not agree. So that's already not according to specification. And Git is our specification here. So that's not true. So a single at is supposed to do that. That works. And this is definitely a test to have. And this would resolve head. Or it would resolve, yeah, let's change the names here right away. I don't want resolve head because that's separate. I want resolve ref. And this is happening in a few places. But yeah, that one is gonna get removed for sure. Let's remove the other candidate. This one is also removable. So here you want to resolve ref. And the resolve ref name is going to be head. Like this. And the return value, yeah. So I think there should be some sort of, how do we do errors? Like, are errors important to us here on this level? If they were, we'd say then we need some sort of error type here. And the delegate could have one generic error type. But then I think it's not important at all to me, even though it would be nice. you know, for us to easily escape error out of that. So what I'm thinking is this could technically be an option, because, or true or false, you know, because I don't really care about the, I just want to know if it worked or not. And then the parser can stop entirely. So working with options, it's usually, what is this? Working with options, it's usually easier in terms of turning this into an error that you can easily error out on. Maybe it's just about the structure of this function here that makes it a bit harder right now. Let's see what the errors are. Do we actually need our own error case here? Because head lookup, we don't have that. ID lookup, we don't have that. Short ID matched multiple objects. That happens when you resolve a prefix, but we don't care about delegate errors, not here. Ref lookup, no. Invalid hex input, that could be something the parser detects. Is it something that is actually being used here somewhere? So there's no from, so this has to be called by hand, but it's not actually called. So I would only have it here if we actually use it. I can imagine that Git itself, yeah, where does Git die? Is there some nice indicator here that tells us, will this die openly? I think this one returns OID result, which probably is, yeah, all these negative ones, they're errors. So yeah, so we can look for die. So if not return, oh look, it actually, it doesn't die here, it only dies in a very specific conditions. And here also, what does revparse do? It also doesn't, yeah, so this means it returns 0, huh? And then it's good. And it can, if it has dash dash, okay, that's something else. It usually, I don't see really how it reports errors. Probably this should be tested, huh? Add ambiguous argument, unknown revision or path not in the working tree. Isn't this the error we saw here? No. Ah, this one. No. Or path not in the working tree. Or path not. So that is... All right. So the question really is, how do we communicate errors in that prefix? Ambiguous argument, unknown revision or path not in the working tree. So once again, where's that coming from? Okay, that happens during setup because that is actually shared among all the Git subcommands that might be there. And they do a lot. Like, look, they even try to understand, is it a path spec or is it a file name or what is it? So is a lot more where this parser has to fit into. Apparently it did try revspec parsing. I mean, must have, right? Because at some point, like, I don't know when it kicks in the revspec parser. But anyway, whatever error was produced there, it's definitely not showing up directly, but instead it just tries a bunch of things and then fails with a somewhat generic name or generic error message. So we probably need some Invalid short ID, no. Invalid navigation. Yeah, the navigation strings. That could be something. Do we use that? Yes, we do use that. That's nice. So that's something we definitely keep. Invalid text is not used, so definitely no keep. Let's figure out what it means to not be able to understand any kind of prefix. Not prefix, but like object name itself. And then invalid rev string. So this is one where it tries to understand. Ah, yeah. So this is where it tries to understand whether this looks like a name, maybe. Maybe it tries to find the things that are not navigation. This is what split part does, maybe. It gives you potentially 3 parts. Ah, yeah, so here we have the name, the navigation part, and the so-called spec. Huh, I don't know what spec is in the sense of revspec parsing. It seemingly is after navigation. And yeah, unfortunately, object name. Oh yeah, wait, we are not an object name anymore. Let's see if there is some sort of mention of spec, but apparently that's not the case. Also, the question how Git does that, always a good thing. Ref found. So this is, I think this function here, get OID basic, is part of what Git uses to split parts. And it even does ref lookups here, which is something that this parser just can't do. But that shouldn't be a problem. Usually Git just mixes everything together, and that's not necessarily the best way of doing things, or the easiest way to test, at least. So we have a benefit there. Because you can just use, different means to look up references or to do certain things. Yeah, so that's just ref resolution apparently. Read ref at. I don't know what the name is that it passes, but this just checks if it resolves. Yeah, anyway, too much detail. You have to get out of that, not to be trapped in that potential rabbit hole. Trying to understand how Git does it. It also understands describe output, by the way. And this is, all these things we need to implement as well and need to test as well. So parsing describe, certainly something that is on top of this. Doesn't seem to be too complicated though. Also having implemented describe myself, it's definitely easy to parse, even though that is not implemented yet. So yeah, it tries a bunch of things to ultimately get an object ID, an initial object ID to start at. And that's really what matters. It leaves the string at the navigation part, and then from there it probably consumes it, So this str, that probably is the input, and then it keeps consuming that. Okay. So here it tries to deal with revlog specifically. And does this ambiguation? I don't know how that really works, but apparently it can do that all by itself. That's good. no additional calls done here, just looking at a path. And I don't know what that really means. Or what, oh, what happened? Ah, this happened. Or what upstream mark really means. Don't know. I'm trying to figure out where this third part is coming from. So I would expect it to be somewhere at the end. It's interesting how complicated this looks, given that I always imagined the implementation of such a parser to be kind of simple. Okay, here's parses numbers apparently for the nth something, or the ref log itself, and that is still get OID basic. Okay, or get short OID. So all that get OID. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Now I see. So here's where it matters. Ooh, the name. Okay. It's interesting that like lots of the parsing for like revlog entry seems to be done in the prefix, but also, yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. I think that always comes first. So revlog lookups, probably something to consider there as well. And the parser just has to tell the delegate, oh, look, now look up this revlog. And now you know, in conjunction with the previous data that you received, the ref name plus revlog specification, that allows you to know which object you're at. Yeah, tree path syntax. This is the syntax I couldn't figure out. So this parses first, apparently. Where's the actual navigation happening? I think if you search for, you find that. So also that also seems to be done here. So it's kind of, yeah, it's more mixed than I thought it would be. Definitely not so trivial to read for somebody who spent no time with it yet. All right, well, I don't know if dealing with path like this is something that can work. Also, it doesn't know about reflog, for instance. So anyway, resolve ref. Yeah, what's the resolve head? Where's resolve ref here? It just indicates error. Question again, I never answered that for myself. How should it do it? Every call to delegate would then have to be done with okay or else, or okay or, and we just have a delegate error. Invalid rev. So Git doesn't seem to have invalid rev. Sure, this parser has it. The question is it correct to have that? I don't know. Let's leave it for now. Other is not used. Okay. So then delegate didn't indicate success. Check delegate for more information. So that's the simplest, most delegate error that I can imagine. So here we go with okay or else. Okay, or error delegate. And yeah, actually we want to error out, right? So and that will happen like this. Yeah, so that should work. Good. So I don't like, I don't like this hard-codedness. Like this tries to do simple cases first. I get it. Oh yeah, by the way, this is definitely not it. There's no unit tests that indicate why this code is here. There's, this can't be like that. This can't stand. So I just leave this as an example. And maybe that's also a good thing to say, okay, look, let's do this test driven. Let's build this up test by test, which means invalid navigation, invalid ref. We just kick out and add more errors later. Find ref by prefix, ref find by prefix. I can see why that would be there. Okay. To do hard code these cases, do actual parsing. Let's see how Git does it or something. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if there's these special cases, but if there's these special cases, I'm saying you always need to have the general case where it actually does the parsing. So this is something that shouldn't be the first thing to do. It should be some optimization that you really see the need for. And split parts, I see why that is there, but then rather than split parts, parse the parts. This does have a few tests. And that's all good and nice. It's just, I think this internal machinery should not be tested, just tested on the top level. So here is some actual consumption of these of individual characters. This should be a mud now, because it will have to adjust its state. It will not receive an object ID. It just has to keep track of the previous object that should always be set by finding one of these, something a delegate has to deal with. Maybe there's better ways to do it, because now either it gets a call find by prefix or it gets a call resolve ref, and this will set its object. But ideally there's a maybe a more obvious way to do that, but I don't know. Yeah, so errors, cut them down to option this. I think you can work with that relatively nicely. Now that I've tried it, okay. Instead of true and false, if you would use true and false, then you couldn't chain it anymore, huh? Then you would always have to do if else, and we do want to chain things like that. That would be better. So split parts, I don't think it works like this. Also, it's not, like if you set it up like this, I think it will be in your way once you try to implement all the other features. Again, with test-driven development, I would feel much more comfortable with this, even if, because then you can refactor and so on, but it's not the case. So testing for an @ sign like this, let's remove it. There's a bunch of stuff that tries to figure out what the initial object is. That's fair. Navigate has a current revision and gets you a new revision, and that's all cool. As an output, we don't have that anymore. Okay. That's all unimplemented. Split parts goes away. Navigate goes away. Parse counter. Parse. Oh, that parses a number. Okay, I see. Yeah, all that should be motivated by some test. So remove. Does that still compile? It does still compile. Now a lot of unused things here. Makes sense. Peekable, B string, byte slice, and one more unused object ID. Okay, so now just to set a baseline, let's set up a one test, the first, hopefully many more to come. So we have spec on the top level. Let's create this as a module. And in there, we have the parsing TFN. So this is an initial test setup. And now we would implement the delegate to do what it needs to do. I would say the simple cases, like how do you call it? Let's like just a head, for example. Just this is the typical case. How do they call it? Branch name, ref name. Sometimes they call it ref name, sometimes branch name. Don't know what the difference is. So here, this lookup order is something that the object database does by default. You don't have to implement that in the parser or in the delegate. It's just a lookup. Yeah, so by ref name, does it mention heads here? When is the first time it mentions it here? Okay, so by ref name. Let's use this terminology. Parse ref name, and then we can give it a few ref names that should work. Oh, I have to check my keyboard settings apparently. I don't know how it gets the idea that I want to have everything spoken. Okay. So spec parse, right? This is a function, and we give it. Why does IntelliJ not pick up on this? Let's try to run that. Create spec. It's the wrong one. Git ref, git revision spec. That's better. Parse. So there it might be like if I want to set this up like this, the delegate, yeah, that's a mock delegate that will just record the calls. Like this. Impl spec parse delegate for mock delegate. It's more like a recorder. I think I will just call it recorder. I'm not so into these long names. Recorder. Because that's all it's going to do. We know resolve ref. What are we going to call here? Resolve ref is going to be called. Okay, we know that. So there should only ever be one call to resolve ref. And that's the B string that we hold, so we can validate that it's the right thing that it called it with. And it's going to be an error if that was already set. Is there a cool way to do that? Probably just an assertion. Resolve ref input is none. Call it resolve ref twice with, then we give it the input here just for good measure, and shall, yeah, we could also fail the parser, right? But then we would probably know less about what's actually happening here. So let's not fail the parser. Let's always be happy. And remember what we were given to owned. And that's that. And that's the implementation of the most simple kind of delegate. And yeah, we could call into here, but yeah, should we call into here? Hey. So usually I do imp ref for these things, but since it's low level, it's probably okay not to have imp ref here, and rather just bite the bullet, call into, or have a little function that gives us a byte string for a string, sorry, a binary string. So like this, and it just abstracts this away. Okay, like that. That's a bit nicer. And we parse, we want to, this should not be an error. And then we expect the mock, the recorder, let's go direct then. I should, it's the same module, so I should have access to this without making it pub. Why does it not show? Is this, oh yeah, it's me not having implemented default. Maybe also debug, just for good measure. Sometimes you might want to dump it to standard error. And now we expect this to be, right. I think it's easiest to do as dref, and then you can just compare it against the B string, but you still have to unwrap it, which probably is also fine because it really should be there. And then we know it should be had. So not quite there yet. Can't compare that with string. Oh, a B string derefs to a vector, unfortunately. Then let's just unwrap it. Also consume, yeah, it's easier. Consume this recorder partially, that's fine. And compare it to head, that should also be working. Okay, no compiler warnings, please. And then I want to say it's a bit surprising that this is actually working, but we have implemented this particular case. This also means that, to me it's worth to highlight this at being a special case that works. I would not know. Is there something that says so? Like if I search for at here, at alone is a shortcut for head. Okay, good. At alone is shortcut for head. See, that should be nice. And yes, we're called with head for resolution, not with at. And that should also work. Okay, so 2 successful tests for the code that is actually there. And from there you can build it up. And yes, this is kind of hard-coded, but now we have tests for that. So we can leave it hard-coded, or we can eventually put it into some sort of, more general parser, which ultimately might be what's needed. I don't know. Also, what happens with white space? Like, is white space, is it going to trim this, or does it expect to be pre-trimmed? What happens if there is a, is this supposed to be clean input? Probably. And that's the baseline now. And this is what can be extended. And that's all. It's going to be super simple, super easy. Probably just implementing the docs step by step is going to cut it because they're quite exhaustive. And then you don't have to try to understand why Git is the way it is, which, you know, this isn't the prettiest Git code I've seen, that's for sure. And it's not super obvious to me. So I don't think much can be learned there. But of course, it's good to see what you have to do. Like, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that you have to check for, and we don't want to miss that. So reading that once and understanding the corner cases is certainly important. And let's commit this. Okay. And yeah, when looking at the document, when looking at this, I see the problem that conventional commits are used all the time, and that ends up in the changelog unnecessarily, because that makes, you know, that helps nobody, and it really will. I don't know if style ends up there. I don't think so, because I made it like this, but change, for example, will show up, and that's a nitty-gritty detail that nobody needs to know. It's not even public facing, so that should not be done. So I don't know if I can push into the branch, if I can force push into the branch. So I don't know if I should rebase this now to fix these commits. Let's just try to push. So Calcan ref parse. Here's the information I want. Git push our head into the branch. I have to do no verify here so that hooks don't run. Otherwise, git lfs will fail the hook because it can't upload objects. Okay, so that worked. That's nice. Let's just try to rebuild the. Now that we have the remote set accordingly, we can get that back. Let's also tag it for good measure. And rebase and see if we can as on git t main. Okay. Let's see if we can force push. Okay, so no need for prefix here, but that's not a, and that parses as conventional commit, so let's make sure it doesn't parse. And nope, 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 nope. Icons are cute and everything, but nope. Okay. So, really? It did not do anything. Oh, I'm stupid. Yeah, that would be nice if you could just edit these like that, huh? But you can't. Okay. Okay. So this wants to be reverted. Revert, revert, revert. Okay. Oh, and I forgot to remove the icon, so let's go again. And this had a VIP in it, and I removed that. Revert. And here, remove the other things there. That would be, I think if I'm going to implement something like this, it will, or maybe it does, probably not, huh? But maybe. So, no, it doesn't pick it up. Great. And now let's see if that still pushes. It does. Nice. Cool. And that shall be the new PR. You see, I'm totally fine with having a ton of small commits, but they should not be forcing themselves into the changelog. And I think that's it for this review. I should write a little message on what to watch out for and then see what happens. All right, so I think I got a comment. It's a very, like, it's super hard for me to be super positive about PRs that cost me a lot of work, because I basically just, had to start over and set the base as I needed, which seems fine to me. But also, this PR is, when code is just thrown at you, it's not necessarily helpful, especially if you have to change everything. And it's hard for me to just say, yes, that's cool and it's for the learning experience, but that's exactly where I say I have limits. And right now, I met this limit. So if something is happening, it can't consume more time than necessary, which probably means, yeah, I'm a bit more rough than I otherwise would be. But let's see how this works out. In theory, that's doable, and I think it's possible to be successful with the frame that I provided, and by limiting the scope of what's to be implemented in this PR to really just basic names, full names, partial names, and ref names, for example. Describe output, maybe as well, but limited to that, and maybe basic navigation, and then you have something that could be mergeable that can then be brought into Git repository in another PR. So that's the idea. Thanks a lot for watching, and goodbye.